When you hear the name Sparta, what comes to mind? Brave warriors, right? Unbreakable discipline, heroic sacrifice, and men who would rather die on the battlefield than retreat. Movies like 300 have cemented this image of a state built on sheer military might. We see Spartan men as the ultimate symbols of strength, facing impossible odds without a hint of fear. But behind this gleaming facade of heroism lies a much darker, more complicated truth. Sparta wasn't just harsh to its enemies. Its cruelty often began at home, directed at its own people. The Spartan system demanded victory at all costs. Defeat wasn't just a military loss, it was a personal disgrace, a stain on one's honor that was nearly impossible to wash away. And this punishment didn't stop with the defeated warrior. It extended in the most painful way to his family, and most cruelly to his wife. What happened to the wives of defeated Spartan soldiers is a part of their history that is often overlooked. It was a form of punishment so profound, it destroyed lives without ever shedding a drop of blood. So, what exactly was this unspeakable fate? To understand it, we need to look at the role of women in Spartan society. Unlike other Greek city-states where women were largely confined to the home, Spartan women enjoyed a surprising degree of freedom. They were educated, could own property, and were expected to be physically fit. Their primary duty was to produce strong, healthy sons for the Spartan army. A woman who gave birth to a future warrior was celebrated. Her status was directly tied to the honor and success of her male relatives, her father, her husband, and her sons. This is where the system turned brutal. If a Spartan warrior died heroically in battle, his mother and wife were expected to show pride, not grief. Herodotus, the ancient historian, tells us that mothers would check their sons' bodies for wounds. If the wounds were on the front, it meant he died facing the enemy, and she would rejoice. If they were on his back, it meant he was fleeing, and she would be filled with shame. A heroic death brought honor to the entire family. The warrior's name might even be inscribed on a tombstone, a rare privilege in Sparta. His wife, now a widow, would be respected as the partner of a hero. But what if he didn't die? What if he survived a lost battle and returned home? In Sparta, this was the ultimate disgrace. These survivors were called trasantes, which means that they were social outcasts. They had to wear special patched cloaks, shave half their beards, and were barred from public office and games. No one would speak to them, share a fire with them, or marry their daughters. They were ghosts in their own city, living reminders of failure. And the wife of a trembler shared his social death. Her world collapsed overnight. The respect she once commanded as the wife of a Spartan soldier vanished. She was now the wife of a coward. She would be shunned by other women, her presence a source of contamination. Her friends would turn away. Her invitations would cease. She was isolated, her social standing completely obliterated. Her children would be bullied and ostracized, their futures tainted by their father's perceived cowardice. Imagine the psychological torment. Your husband returns from war, not in a coffin draped in honor, but alive and cloaked in shame. The man you married is now a pariah, and by extension, so are you. Your life's purpose in Sparta to be the mother and wife of honorable men is shat. You are forced to live with the constant, public humiliation of his failure. This wasn't a physical punishment, but a deep, emotional, and social one that lasted a lifetime. It was a slow, public execution of a woman's identity and place in society. This cruel practice reveals the true nature of the Spartan system. It wasn't just about creating strong soldiers. It was about enforcing absolute conformity through fear and shame. The pressure on a warrior to win or die was immense, not just for his own honor, but for the social survival of his entire family. The fate of these women shows that Sparta's strength was built on a foundation of unforgiving cruelty, a system that sacrificed individual happiness and humanity for the sake of the state. The story of Sparta is not just one of battlefield glory, but also of silent, forgotten suffering in the shadows of defeat. In the sun-drenched landscape of ancient Greece, one city stood apart, a chilling testament to military discipline and brutal efficiency. This was Sparta. While Athens was building the Parthenon, and its philosophers were debating the nature of democracy, Sparta was forging soldiers. Forget art, poetry, and comfort. In Sparta, there was only one creed: obedience, strength, and victory. From the moment a Spartan was born, their life was not their own. It belonged to the state. Newborns were inspected by city elders. If a baby was deemed weak or imperfect, it was left on a hillside to die. Survival of the fittest wasn't just a theory, it was state policy. This brutal selection process ensured that only the strongest would grow to become Spartans. If a boy survived this initial trial, his life was a relentless preparation for war. At the age of 7, he was taken from his family and entered the Agoj, a state-sponsored military academy. This wasn't school as we know it. It was a crucible designed to strip away individuality and forge a loyal, unthinking warrior. The boys were kept perpetually hungry, encouraging them to steal food. If they were caught, they were beaten, not for stealing, but for their incompetence in getting caught. They slept on hard beds of reeds. They had to cut themselves, wore a single garment year, and were subjected to constant, punishing physical training. This system was designed to create men who felt no fear, no pain, and no pity. Comradeship was everything. They fought, ate, and slept together, building bonds that would make them an unbreakable force on the battlefield. The famous Spartan phalanx, a wall of shields and spears, was more than a military formation. It was a physical manifestation of their collective identity. Every soldier trusted the man next to him with his life, because they had endured the same hell together. Spartan women were also unique in the Greek world. While other Greek women were confined to the home, Spartan women were educated, owned land, and were expected to be physically fit. Why? Because their primary duty was to bear strong sons for the state. A strong mother, it was believed, would produce a strong warrior. They were known for their sharp minds and even sharper tongues. When an Athenian woman asked a Spartan queen why Spartan women were the only ones who could rule men, she famously replied, "Because we are the only ones who give birth to men." Their farewell to their sons and husbands heading off to war was legendary. Come back with your shield, or on it. Victory or death. There was no third option. This singular focus on military prowess came at a great cost. Sparta produced no great works of art, no lasting philosophy, no groundbreaking science. Their society was rigid, hierarchical, and built on the backs of a massive enslaved population known as the Spartans lived in constant fear of a Helid uprising, and this fear fueled their oppressive system. They were, in effect, prisoners of their own creation, a society so dedicated to control that it stifled everything that makes life rich and varied. So, when we think of Sparta, we see a paradox. We admire their courage, their discipline, their unmatched skill in battle, but we must also see the darkness that fueled it. The infanticide, the brutal child rearing, the oppressive social structure. They achieved military perfection, but in doing so, they sacrificed much of their humanity. Sparta stands as a powerful and terrifying lesson in history about the extremes a society will go to for the sake of survival and supremacy. Imagine a world where the only options are to come back with your shield or on it. This wasn't just a cool movie line. It was the brutal reality for the warriors of ancient Sparta. For them, life was a constant, grueling preparation for one thing and one thing only: war. And in this unforgiving society, there was no middle ground. There was only victory or death. Defeat was a stain so deep, it was considered worse than not coming back at all. So, why was this the case? It all starts with the Agoj, the infamous Spartan training system. From the tender age of 7, boys were taken from their families and plunged into a life of brutal discipline and hardship. They were taught to endure pain, hunger, and cold without complaint. They learned to fight, to steal for food without getting caught, and above all, to place the needs of Sparta above their own. This system wasn't just about creating strong soldiers. It was about forging a collective identity, a brotherhood where the individual was meaningless, and the phalanxa. Spartan battle formation was everything. When these men marched into battle, they weren't just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for their honor, their family's name, and the glory of Sparta itself. A victory brought immense prestige. The victors were hailed as heroes, their names celebrated, their families showered with respect. They had fulfilled their purpose, upholding the values that had been drilled into them since childhood. Victory was the ultimate validation of their entire existence. But what happened if they lost? This is where the Spartan mindset becomes truly terrifying. For a Spartan warrior, death in battle was an honorable end. It was a sacrifice for the state, a final act of courage. The names of those who died heroically were often inscribed on public monuments. Their mothers would famously say they were proud to have given birth to such worthy sons for Sparta. Death, in this context, was a form of success. It was a respectable outcome. Survival in defeat, however, was the ultimate disgrace. A warrior who retreated, surrendered, or simply survived a lost battle was known as a trembler, or asterisk. These men returned home not to comfort, but to a life of public shaming and isolation. They were stripped of their rights as citizens. They had to shave half their beards, wear special patched cloaks to mark them as cowards, and endure constant insults and physical abuse from everyone, including their own families. No one would marry them or their children. They were ghosts in their own city, living reminders of failure. Think about the psychological pressure. Your entire life, you're told that your worth is tied to your performance in battle. Your mother literally tells you to come back victorious or dead. The man standing next to you in the phalanx is your brother, who you've trained with your whole life. If you break formation, you not only risk your own life, but the lives of everyone around you. The shield wasn't just for personal protection. It covered the man to your left. Dropping your shield to run was an act of supreme selfishness, betraying the entire unit. This extreme black and white view of honor and shame is what made the Spartans so formidable. They fought with a ferocity born from the knowledge that there was no acceptable alternative to winning. It is why King Leonidas and his 300 at Thermopylae chose to fight to the last man rather than retreat. They knew that dying there would secure their immortal glory, whereas returning home in failure would mean a life of unbearable shame. They chose an honorable death over a dishonorable life. This wasn't just a military strategy. It was the core of their culture, a brutal but effective code that forged one of history's most legendary fighting forces. Have you ever wondered what it was really like to live in ancient Sparta? We all have this image of fierce warriors in bronze helmets, but the reality for the average Spartan was far more intense and, frankly, terrifying. Forget everything you think you know about freedom and personal choice. In Sparta, there was only one thing that mattered. The state. The individual was nothing. The entire Spartan system was built on a foundation of fear. The state believed that fear was the ultimate tool to keep society strong, disciplined, and obedient. Did someone step out of line? The punishment would be swift and brutal. It wasn't about justice in the way we understand it today. It was about making an example of someone to terrify others into submission. If a punishment, no matter how harsh, created obedience, then in the eyes of the Spartan leadership, it was completely justified. The suffering of one person was a small, acceptable price to pay for the stability of the whole. This relentless pressure started from birth and never let up. Every aspect of a Spartan's life was controlled, monitored, and judged. This philosophy extended to every single person, including women. Now, you might have heard that Spartan women had more freedom than women in other Greek city-states like Athens. And in some ways, that's true. Spartan women could own and inherit land. They managed large estates while the men were away at war, and they were famously outspoken. Unlike their Athenian counterparts, who were mostly confined to the home, Spartan women were encouraged to be physically fit, participating in sports and public processions. They weren't hidden away. But here is the crucial catch. This freedom was not for their personal benefit or happiness. It had one single, overarching purpose: to serve the state. A Spartan woman's primary, and most honored, role was to be a mother. But not just any mother. Her sacred duty was to produce strong, healthy children who would grow up to be unbreakable warriors and unwavering mothers of future warriors. A strong body was believed to produce a strong baby. Her education, her diet, her entire life was geared towards this one goal. She was a vessel for the next generation of soldiers. This is the chilling paradox of Sparta. The freedom given to women was not for their own self-fulfillment, but was a calculated investment by the state. A woman who could manage property ensured the economic stability of the warrior class. A woman who was educated and could speak her mind was expected to instill Spartan values of courage and sacrifice in her children. The famous line attributed to a Spartan mother telling her son to come back with his shield, or on it, perfectly encapsulates this mindset. Victory or death were the only acceptable outcomes. There was no room for personal grief if it undermined the state's goals. So when we look at Sparta, we see a society that achieved incredible military might and stability for centuries, but it came at an unimaginable cost to the individual. Life was a relentless test of endurance, where personal desires, dreams, and even love were secondary to the demands of the collective. The freedom of Spartan women was just another gear in the ruthless, efficient machine of the state. It makes you think, doesn't it? What is true freedom, and what price is too high to pay for security and strength? It's a question the Spartans answered in their own brutal. Have you ever wondered what marriage was like in ancient Sparta? Forget everything you know about modern romance, because for the Spartans, tying the knot had very little to do with love. It was all about duty. A Spartan marriage was a strategic alliance, a contract signed for the good of the state. The primary goal, to produce strong, healthy children who would grow up to be the next generation of Spartan warriors and mothers. Think about it this way. Your entire life was geared towards serving Sparta. From the moment you were born, you were state property. So, it only makes sense that your marriage would be too. Men typically married around the age of 30, after they had completed their rigorous military training. Women, on the other hand, married much younger, usually around 18 or 20. The idea was that couples in their prime physical condition would produce the best offspring. The state even had a hand in matchmaking, ensuring that pairings were genetically favorable. Now, what was a wife's role in all this? Her main job was to run the household, the oikos, and manage the helots, the state-owned serfs who did all the manual labor. This freed up the men to focus entirely on their military duties. But her most crucial responsibility was to raise her children, especially her sons, with unwavering Spartan values. She was the first person to instill in them the ideas of discipline, courage, and absolute loyalty to Sparta. A mother's famous farewell to her son going off to war was, "Return with your shield, or on it." This sums up the immense pressure and expectation placed on women to produce true warriors. A wife's personal honor was directly tied to her husband's success and bravery. In Spartan society, everything was public. Your reputation, your family's standing, it was all judged in the open court of public opinion. There were no private lives. Shame was a powerful weapon used to enforce conformity and excellence. If a man showed cowardice in battle or failed in his duties, it wasn't just his own reputation that was destroyed. The shame was a stain that spread to his entire household. His wife, his children, his parents, they all carried the burden of his failure. Imagine the pressure. If your husband was deemed a trembler, someone who fled from battle, he would be ostracized. He'd be forced to wear special patched cloaks and shave half his beard as a public mark of his disgrace. And his wife? She would be scorned, her social standing shattered. No one would marry her daughters. Her sons would be relentlessly bullied. The family was essentially cast out from the tight-knit Spartan community. This collective punishment ensured that every single member of the household had a vested interest in the man's success on the battlefield. This system created an environment where women were not just passive bystanders. They were active enforcers of the Spartan military code. They would praise the brave and openly shame the cowardly, even their own family members. A Spartan mother would rather hear that her son died honorably in battle than that he had survived by running away. This might sound incredibly harsh to us, but for them, honor was more important than life itself. The survival and glory of Sparta trumped any personal feelings or family bonds. So, while Spartan women had more freedom and education than their counterparts in other Greek city-states, like Athens, this freedom came with a heavy price. Their lives were a constant performance under the watchful eye of society. Their value was measured by their ability to produce strong sons and uphold the brutal ideals of their warrior culture. It was a world where personal happiness was secondary to the needs of the state, and where marriage was not a union of hearts, but a pillar supporting the entire Spartan war machine. It's a fascinating, and frankly, a chilling look at a society so completely different from our own. Ever wonder what really happened to warriors who lost a battle in the ancient world? It wasn't just about surviving or dying on the field. For many, the aftermath was a social death sentence, a life sentence of shame. Let's dive into the brutal reality faced by defeated soldiers, especially in the unforgiving society of ancient Sparta. Imagine you're a warrior. Your entire identity, your family's honor, everything you've ever known is tied to victory. But today, you lost. You retreat, you surrender, or you're simply on the losing side. What happens next? You're not just a soldier who had a bad day. You're a failure. And in many ancient cultures, failure wasn't something to learn. From it was something to be despised. When defeated warriors returned home, if they were allowed to return at all, they were often stripped of every ounce of respect they once held. The very people who had celebrated them as heroes now turned their backs. They were mocked in the streets. Their names whispered with contempt. They became walking ghosts, present in body but erased from the social fabric of their community. Their opinions were ignored, their voices silenced. They were excluded from public gatherings, religious ceremonies, and even simple conversations. It was as if they had a contagious disease, and that disease was dishonor. Their lives became cautionary tales. Parents would point to them and tell their children, "See that man? That's what happens when you fail. That is what you must never become." This public humiliation wasn't just cruel. It was a deliberate strategy. It was a powerful tool used by the state to instill a win-at-all-costs mentality. The fear of social death was often more terrifying than the fear of actual death in battle. It ensured that soldiers would fight with desperate ferocity, choosing to die on their feet rather than live on their knees. Now, let's talk about Sparta. No society perfected the art of weaponizing shame quite like the Spartans. For them, there was only one acceptable outcome of a battle: returning with your shield, or on it. Surviving a defeat was the ultimate disgrace. The historian Herodotus tells us about the aftermath of the famous Battle of Thermopylae. While we celebrate the 300 who died, 2 Spartans, Aristodemus and Pantites, survived. Pantites, sent as a messenger, was so ashamed he took his own life. Aristodemus, who had been suffering from an eye infection, returned to Sparta. He wasn't welcomed. He was branded Aristodemus, the trembler, a coward. No one would speak to him. No one would share a fire with him. He was completely ostracized. He only redeemed himself by dying suicidally, bravely, in the later Battle of Plataea. But Spartan shame didn't stop with the individual. They believed shame should be a communal experience, a contagion that spreads to the entire family. The mother of a defeated soldier would be disgraced. His father would lose standing in the community. His wife and children would be shunned. This is what you call extreme social engineering. By punishing the family, Sparta ensured that every single person in society had a vested interest in the success of their warriors. The pressure wasn't just on the soldier. It was on his mother, his wife, his children. The entire household carried the weight of his performance on the battlefield. This system created an incredibly effective, but brutal, military machine. Every Spartan boy was raised knowing that the price of failure was absolute. It wasn't just his own life or honor on the line. It was the social survival of his entire family. This collective punishment ensured that the fear of failure permeated every aspect of Spartan life. It was a dark and powerful motivator, a constant reminder that in Sparta, victory was the only path to a meaningful existence. The lives of the defeated were not just ruined. They were used as fuel for the Spartan war machine. This brutal logic shows us a side of the ancient world that's often glorified. We see the armor, the battles, the heroes, but behind the glory was a culture of intense pressure and psychological warfare, where a single loss could cost you everything and more. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this glimpse into the darker side of ancient history interesting, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. Let me know in the comments what other historical topics you'd like to explore. See you next time.